Well, good morning. Good morning. Thank you. I was a little worried there for a second. Great to have you all, everyone joining us online. Great to have you for sure. So we're in the midst of this series called Growing Pains, and it's literally about that. But maybe at a spiritual and emotional level as well as just human beings. And sometimes we grow and it can be wonderful and good, but that growth brings some difficulty or some struggles or some things to work through in all of that. And so we've been looking at that, and I want to look at that some more today and just how we navigate that. So a long time ago when I was in high school and didn't have my own car yet, I was driving the family car. It was a yellow VW Bug, Volkswagen, and it could break down every once in a while. It wasn't exactly super reliable, and I remember driving it. I think it was to school. It may have been work. I can't remember, but driving it to school, and it started kind of acting funny. And we lived out in the Tucson mountains, kind of going up and down these hills, and it like going up the hills. It's just is like lurching and running rough. And I'm like, oh, and just in my mind, I'm just like, oh man, it's giving out. I mean, like that sounds like the whole engine is just going to go kaput, right? And then sure enough, man, I get right over the top of this hill and it just kind of cuts out and dies. And now I'm coasting down this hill and I'm trying to get it restarted, and I do the thing where you stick it in gear and you pop the clutch and nothing. And I remember it's coasting to a stop and I'm sitting there and I try and restart, it won't restart. And I'm just like, it's done. I mean, it's cooked. It's over. And this was in the days before, cell phones and stuff. So I walked home, okay? All the way home. Got on the phone with my dad and I'm just like, Dad, bad news, like the Volkswagen is done, cooked. Let's get a different family car. Better one, right? Told him how bad it was and all the things. And so then, I don't know, I probably took one of our other cars to school, came back. And then that evening, my dad is like, well, let's go get the Volkswagen, right? And so we drive off together and we go get the Volkswagen and he's checking the engine and doing all the stuff that a dad does in, one of those circumstances. And then he's like, I think it's just out of gas. I'm like, no way, and he had this little gas can and he put some gas in it and it fired right up. And I was just like, what? Like, no way, right? And I tell that story because I think there's something that happens in life with us in a similar way. We can be going through life and again, I want you to think about this in terms of like God's growing you through something. You're getting stronger, smarter, better at something. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be rough patches in it. It doesn't mean that it's smooth. And there can be these moments where it's just like, man, something's going wrong here and this just doesn't feel right or whatever. But what if in a sense, all that's happening a little bit is that spiritually or emotionally, you're just running out of gas. Like there's just, you're on E and it's just not working. Ever know someone who was excited to go to college and they got everything all ready and then they go off to college and then like 2 years into it, you can just tell they're like running out of gas. It's just, they used to talk about, yeah, I'm so excited and, I'm going to do this and that. And then it's like, so are you going to class? Well, some, and you just see it where it's like they're not going to make it through the semester, or this is going to be their last semester, and they're smart. It's not beyond them. It's like they have no energy or no motivation to just keep going down that path. And sure, it's hard and it's difficult, but it's it's just, they could do it in one sense, but it's like their heart is just run out of gas. Or maybe there's something going on where you work. Maybe you've had to change careers, or maybe they put you on a big project and it's pushing you, but you're growing, you're figuring out. Maybe there's personnel issues that you're having to dive in and you're having to learn a whole new team and you're going through all this stuff. And as you go through all these things, it just feels like they're just stacking up and stacking up and stacking up. But you also look back and go, man, I'm growing. I'm getting better at this and I'm getting better at this. But have you ever had a moment where God's like stacked up a bunch of lessons and you feel like you're really growing and your prayer is this? God, I don't want to grow for a while. Can I just stop the growing process for a while? Because growing's hard sometimes, right? And it's not that you don't want to grow. It's just, man, the energy and the effort. I'm just running out of gas for this. I'm not facing these challenges the way I once did in all of this. We can just go, like there's this thing where we can go through life and run into this place where we just start to lose that motivation. And it's just because your tank has gotten a little empty in there. Have you ever thought about this? Growth takes a lot of energy. It really does. To grow means there's things that you've got to reflect on. There's choices that you've got to think through. It can be very humbling at times. Change is never an easy thing in all of this. And growth ends up taking a ton of energy. In fact, growth consumes emotional and mental energy like the way a 747 burns jet fuel, right? You can't just coast, right? Because if you do, you'll come to a stop in it. And what I want to talk about today is how do we just maybe put some more gas in our tank if we're at one of those places where it's just like, it feels like my life is lurching and sputtering and it's just and maybe it's nothing more than you just need some gas in your tank. And I want to get at this by looking at a guy by the name of Paul. You see him a lot in the New Testament. And Paul is an interesting guy because he is tenacious and fiery. There's even a part when you just look at him, you're just like, man, that guy, did he ever run out of gas emotionally or mentally? What's going on there? Let me read a couple of things that he wrote out of the New Testament. He writes this. He says, "Therefore, I run in such a way as not to run aimlessly. I box in such a way as to avoid hitting air." I mean, he's using, he's a runner, he's a boxer, and you're just like, this guy, he exhausts me just listening to, reading him sometimes in this. But man, it's just like he just keeps on going and keeps on going. And it can be easy when we read something like that. We're going to read one passage in Philippians where he talks about, I press on. There's another place where he talks about, I run the race, talking about life. I run the race of life in such a way as to win the prize. You give everything on it. You don't leave anything out on the track. And sometimes it's easy to read what Paul says like this and think, well, he sounds like a guy that's right at the beginning of the race, right? Hey, I'm going to run and I'm going to box and I'm, all these things. And it's just that's what I sound like when I'm at the very beginning. But put me, you're going to run a marathon. Don't ask a marathoner how they're doing, before the firing gun starts. Ask them at mile 20, right? And that's when, right? And it's easy to maybe think of Paul as but Paul, you don't understand how tired I am or just how out of gas I am in this moment. But I want you to think about this for just a moment. We get to see a little bit of Paul's earlier life, a little bit before he became a follower of Christ. And the change is really significant. When we first see Paul, he is a guy who has dedicated himself to being a religious scholar against everything that Jesus would stand for. He was a guy that stood in opposition to saying, this new Christian movement and who Jesus was, they've got it all wrong. He banks his life's reputation on that. And then he has to come back and grow a little bit and go, I was wrong. Think of the conversations Paul had to have with old colleagues. Yeah, I know what I used to say, but I think I've changed on that. Can you imagine how humbling that would have been? That takes energy. When we change, when we grow, there's moments of growth. It's just Oh, that's humbling. And that takes emotional energy. There's moments where we have to struggle through, okay, how do I live this new thing out? And that takes energy. Paul had to go from, right, that guy that was living a whole religious system by the law to coming to this place where by faith, he trusted this relational thing to Christ. And by the time we see Paul writing these words that we're going to look at in Philippians, you have to understand he has gone on this very long journey of growth. He is now in the midst of having, not just in a personal way becoming a follower of Christ, he has now become an apostle. He has now become this leader, starting churches. He has been beaten, he has been shipwrecked, he has been beat up and left for dead. He has had everyone come out. He has had a really hard life. I mean, by the time we get to this, he understands what growth pains are all about because he's experienced it. And yet, it's interesting how he speaks to it. In fact, if you have your Bibles, turn to Philippians chapter 3, because this is what we're going to look at. Philippians chapter 3 here, starting in verse 13. He says this, brothers and sisters, I do not regard myself as having taken hold of it yet. And so he's talked about this whole spiritual life of this like new life in Christ, where he's given up the law and that whole thing for what it means to become a follower of Christ. And what he's acknowledging there is there's more growth, right? I need to grow more. And he's grown a lot. But he understands, I haven't taken hold of all of it yet. There's more for me to grow in. So he says, brothers and sisters, I do not regard myself as having taken hold of it yet. But one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and reaching toward to what lies ahead. And here's the key that I want you to look, just the beginning of verse 14. I press on toward the goal. That doesn't sound like a man who's out of gas, is it? Like there's something that Paul figured out about life, about his spiritual journey that I'd like to propose. He found a way to keep putting gas in his tank. And his people who are also seeking to understand this whole thing with Christ, and his people who run out of gas, what can we learn from Paul? And there's just kind of a simple thing here that I want us to see from Paul. And I'm going to unpack this more, but I'm going to start with just the really simple, straightforward thing that I think we see in Paul. And it's this. Paul had a deep rock bottom why to his life. And when I say why, when you think of a why in the sense of he knows why he is doing what he's doing. He knows why his life matters. He knows why he has a gift to this world. He knows why he is investing energy and time into the things that he does, why he chooses to live the way he does. He has that. He has this deep why. And having that why, I think, is true to the whole human experience. I think it's how God made us as human beings. We as human beings, if we don't have a why, we're gonna struggle with it. And it's like innate into us. In fact, you even see this with kids. Like if you ever were a kid, you would know this, right? Ever have a moment where like your parents were like, hey, I want you to make your bed. And you were just like, why? Yeah, because I'm just going to get in it tonight and mess it all up again. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? And your parents give you some answer and you're just like, but why? Why, right? We want to know this. We've all experienced these moments in this. And Paul gives this answer here in Philippians 3. He kind of walks through this. And he does it in two ways. There's two parts of his why that he talks about here in Philippians 3 that I want to look at. And the first one is more of what I'm going to call a universal kind of why. And it's this. He wants to know Christ and be more like Christ. This is a deep, profound why that Paul holds. And he holds it in a universal way. In other words, what he would say is, this is a why for all of us. And I agree with him. Right? And you think about Paul, this makes sense. He's like, I lived in this place where God was a long ways off. And there was this system of rules and religion and all of these things that life was about navigating all these things to somehow be right with this God that was a long ways away. And now I have come to believe that Jesus is like, I want nothing between you and me. In fact, I want you to actually know me in a personal kind of relational way. Think of what that would mean to Paul, like dedicated his life to that whole system and then to go, but like God likes me enough that he wants to know me and be a part of my life in some way. I want more of that. I want to understand that. And I think Paul would say that in this relationship with Christ, that I want to know the transformation of that. I want to experience what it's like as I get close to him and how he's going to change me and mold me and grow me in some ways. And there's a universal side to this that I think is beautiful. Look at what he says in verse 8, Philippians verse 8. He says, and this is just the first part. He says, in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. He's like, I don't know that there's anything more rock bottom than knowing Jesus Christ, right? This is huge for him. And that everything else is like rubbish compared to that. Look at the rest of verse 8. He says, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things and count them mere rubbish so that I may gain Christ. So in those moments where like he's getting beat up for something, he's like, okay, do I go back in the city? Yeah, I'm going to go back in the city. He's given up some things in this because I want to know Christ. I want to try and follow Christ in this moment. And I think he's asking me to go back in the city and share this with people. And so I'm going to go do that. It gives him fuel in moments that on his own, he wouldn't have it. And you know what? We're the same way. We're the same way. That we need to have a sense of this why. But here's the thing, and this leads to the second part of what he talks about. Because I think if you were to ask Paul, why do you press on? He would say this, right? A couple of things. One, I want to know Christ. He has a why in this. But here's the thing that I think often gets missed. But it's really important, and it's this. Paul had a very deep personal why. Something that I think he would have looked at and said, this is unique to me. Paul has some personal whys in all of this. Look at, because he goes through kind of that more universal why, and then he gets like halfway through verse 12, and he says this. He kind of switches to this other. Halfway through verse 12, he says this. I may also, right? So also, like there was this other thing I've been talking about, but also you need to know this. Here's what drives me. Also, may I also take hold of that for which I, right, him personally, for which I was even taken hold of by Christ Jesus. And he says, you know what? I realize Jesus took hold of me, right? Me personally, Paul. There's something that I want that too. Right? He has, there's a why behind what he would say is like Jesus took hold of even me in this moment. And you see this play out in Paul's life. And I'm sure there were ways that we'll never know how it was played out. It may have played out in some way that is never described in Scripture. But we see it in this way. When Paul went off and actually started his ministry and starting these churches and stuff. He had skill and talent. He could have been starting churches all over the known world, what he knew. But it's interesting, if you actually look at all of Paul's ministry and journey and every place he went, it's interesting where he didn't go. He never went down to Egypt, where there were lots of opportunities down there. He never went into a more Semitic culture, which he would have understood far more in some ways. Like he didn't travel east from Jerusalem. He traveled exclusively north and west up into the area that was predominantly Roman and Greek. People who didn't even know about that whole law system that Paul knew about. He had a why that said, I want those people to know about Christ. And it's not that he said, people living in other areas don't matter. It's just there was a kind of passion and drive in him to reach a Greek and Roman world where he wanted to bring that message. And you know what's interesting? There were other apostles that didn't focus on that as much. It's like they had a personal why, and they did ministry in other parts of the world, and so that the gospel spread. But Paul had clarity on this deeper, more personal kind of why that he had. And what I would say is, we need to understand that. And we need to understand that, like, there's a universal why that I think God gives us, but there's probably a very personal why. And for each and every one of us, not any why will do, right? Paul's why couldn't be Peter's why. And Peter and John's why couldn't be Paul's. Like you've got to dig in and figure out, like, what's the one that fits me? Growing up, my sister Julie and I, we played a lot of different instruments growing up because my parents were like always trying to expose us to new things, right? New adventures and new opportunities and new skills or whatever. Like, how many of you grew up and you like played some sort of instrument at some point, even if it was like yeah. So I remember, playing the what do they call that thing? Record? Yes, yeah. You can tell it had a deep impact on my life. I think it was cornet or trumpet lessons and piano lessons. I even took banjo lessons at one point, I suppose, guitar. I don't know what it was, right? And Julie and I, oftentimes we would do this at the same time because like mom and dad would be like, hey, we met someone and they're a piano teacher. We think you two should take piano lessons now. And I was like, oh, okay, right? And so, but I was like 5 years older, so I always kind of had an edge on it, right? I could jump out front a little bit on this. But it's interesting, you never see me playing an instrument up here, ever, right? Because that didn't stick with me too well. But my sister ended up picking up the cello, and she got better and better and better at it. She didn't start there, because I remember the early days of her playing the cello, right? Because, man, I would give her a hard time for it. Like, Mom, why does she have to keep practicing right now? Like, it's hurting me, right? And just like, and yet she put up with me in that. She practiced and practiced and practiced. She went on to not just play the cello. And this is how you know someone's like become good. Like, she didn't just play the cello. She became a cellist. Right? Because when you become a cellist, you realize like you've gone somewhere with this. She went and got her college degree she was a music performance major with cello. Like, she got really good. People pay her to play the cello now, right? And it's like, well, how did she get to that place? Because I remember hours and hours and hours of her practicing. There were times when her fingertips would become just like raw from just, playing the same set of notes or whatever you call that in music over and over again to learn it. And for her, there was this passion. Something resonated with her with music, specifically with the cello, where it wasn't enough to just play the notes or even play them well. She wanted it to come alive. She would sit and go over the same thing until she could do it with such ease and just make that cello do something that would make a listener feel emotional or get lost in it. She had passion for this and drive for this, and went on to become this amazing, amazing cellist. And I think about that, and it's interesting to me. 2 kids raised in the same family by the same parents with the same opportunities, with the same encouragement. But I ran out of gas, right? Like way before her, and she didn't. And it just turns out that Julie's why wouldn't work as my why, right? All the things that this kind of deep why that would keep putting gas in her tank, even when her fingertips hurt, even when it meant giving up going out and doing other things because she needed to spend another hour, 2, 3, 4 hours practicing or working on something. And the reason she could keep doing that wasn't just because she thought, well, I ought to do this, or because it's like, well, this seems fun, or it's because she had gas in her tank that was this deeper why that pulled her through some of those difficult moments. And friends, like, we're all going to need that. We need that in life. We need it at a spiritual level, a relational level, mental. It's because, again, it's how God wired us as human beings. I believe that God put an innate why and need for that why in all of us. There's just so many places in Scripture that keep pointing us back to how God created us, and finding that why becomes life-giving. And you know what? Without it, you find that it's like energy's being sapped out of you, right? There's a struggle to do things that you want to do and that you think are good things, but you can just lose that energy to keep going through some of those growing pains because you don't hold that deeper why. So here's what I want to do. I want to just take a few minutes, and I want to walk through just 4 things in helping you find your why. Because I think in the world we live in today, it can be easy with all of the voices around us, with all of the things going on. There's just so many demands on our lives, and we have pretty fast-paced lives. It's easy to lose that sense of what your why is. And I want you to feel that you have that sense of something that Jesus put in you that is a deeper kind of why. And part of what this means is you have to find a why that is greater than the pain and effort or struggle of whatever it is that you want to avoid, right? I think of my sister, and like all of that practicing that she did, I am sure there was a lot of that she wanted to avoid, but she had a why that was stronger than what she wanted to avoid in that. And it became like gas in her tank to keep on growing and moving forward. So 4 things with this, 4 things. First one is this: make time in the right space. And what I mean by this is, if you're going to find your why, you're going to have to process this, right? God's probably not going to send you a postcard or an email. And if he does, lucky you, okay? But most of us, God never tells us that way. There's a discovery process with understanding what your why is. And if you're going to have to process that and think through that, you need to understand that there are moments or situations or environments that you're going to be much better at being introspective, much better at processing something, much better at just praying through it with God in this. So like, here's one of the things that I know. And I get it. A lot of people are not like me in this, but let me flip it around. For some of you, having a quiet, still place, like a coffee shop, and you're the only person in there, or your favorite room in the house, and just sit in a chair with a journal and no sound, and just like you're in heaven, right? You can process and think. And if that's you, that is awesome. You go with that. If I do that, I either fall asleep or I'm like, well, I'm just like, and I'm just like a squirrel, bird. What's like? It's just like, that's not my place in there, right? I have found over the years some of the places where I hear God's voice the best, some of the places where I can be introspective in the deepest ways is when I'm in the middle of doing something, like hiking or running. And oftentimes it is outside, not inside. And if it's got to be inside, like give me a coffee shop that is overloaded with people and there's just like a ton of things going on. And that's just me. And maybe some of you, I see a few of you are like, yeah, I get you on that. But you've got to find what that space is for you. Find the space that best helps you where you can actually introspect. Maybe for you, it's when you're driving someplace. Maybe it's when you need to process it with someone else, and there's one or two people in your life, and you go, when I process it with them, that's when I get to that deeper side of it. Find that thing, okay? Because now you need to start asking the question, right? What is my why? And to get at that, here's the second thing, is ask what is really important. This is a great question to start with. What is really, really important to me in this? What is the thing that naturally makes you passionate about something? Oftentimes when I'm teaching or whatever, there'll be times where all of a sudden tears come and you see it and I don't know what to do with it. I can't stop it. And I've just learned to just keep on going. But I've also learned those are the moments I'm probably talking about something that I've got passion for it. It's deep in my heart. And that's a clue, right? And so what is it for you? What are those things where you find that space, where you see those things being triggered? It's interesting what he says. Look at verse 14, where he says these words, I press on to the goal. And I love this word. In the Greek, this word for goal, it comes from the word that is a kind of marker or flag that stands out. It becomes the thing that you can see far, far off. And so when you think about this, what is the thing that you find your heart turning toward far off and you say, that matters to me. That is who I am in this thing. And the reason I pull this out is a point here is because oftentimes when we go to say, okay, God, what is my why? One of the places we often go is what we think it ought to be. And here's what I mean by that. I could come up with a list of whys that we'd go, oh, that's really no. I mean, Paul, you know what his why was? He only wanted to reach all the Romans and the Greeks in the world, right? And I just want to learn how to play the guitar or something. And it's just wow, I think I should be a missionary to something over here. Don't pick something because you think that ought to be your why, because that seems really spiritual, or that seems because if you don't really derive passion out of it, if it's not something that speaks deep in your heart, you may have picked something really noble, but you haven't found the thing that will put gas in your tank. Because here's what'll happen. You'll pick something and you'll say, right, I think that's the right thing. I think, right, that seems really spiritual or godly. And you'll start to pursue that. But what do you think will happen as you pursue that and it starts to get hard and difficult and the lessons, drag out longer and it won't be putting gas in your tank. You need a why that puts gas in your tank. You need a why that says, okay, I am tired and my fingertips hurt and I've gone over this chord or these notes out but I want to bring this music to life. I want to make this cello sing, right? For my sister, it wasn't enough to even get the notes right, to hear her talk about she hears things and what it does. And that mattered to her. So when it got painful or difficult, she had a why that kept her going through it. So what's really important to you? Whatever why God has given you, it will matter to you. You won't have to manufacture a sense of importance to it. It will hold it for you. Because the truth is, if the why you hold doesn't move you, it's not your why. Okay? Third thing here. It may be helpful sometimes to reflect back. Okay? Because maybe there was something going on in years past that you started engaging that. And then as you ran into struggles, as life became complicated and you lost touch with a why that maybe you once had. I'll see this in marriages oftentimes. It's easy, right? To be in love with someone and cultivate that, and you get married and you go through years and years and years, and you're raising kids and making a living and doing all these things, and you get aggravated with each other, and you come back and you just go, well, we just need to learn how to communicate better. And is that a good thing? Yes, that I always encourage better communication. But it's still like this thing, there's this agitation, you keep and it's just and one of the things that I have said to couples, and the reason I say this is because I discovered this for me in my own marriage. It's you know what? There was something about Angie that I more than just fell in love with it, that I grew to love. There was something about life. There was, when we got married, there was something that we had in our relationship that I was I want to do life with this woman. Well, sometimes when I'm really aggravated with her, and it's just because, it happens, right? Just like it does with all of us. Sometimes going back and saying, at a rock bottom level, what was the thing that I wanted, that I was passionate about, that I saw in her and in our relationship? What's that? Because if I can get back to that, why I married her in the first place, now I've got energy in my tank to begin navigating some of these other things, see? And this is true in lots of things. It's true with parenting. It's true in your career. It's true in your spiritual journey. Figure out what that is. And sometimes reflecting back will help you immensely in this, okay? So one last thing in here. And this is more of kind of a continuing process in this. But here's the fourth thing. Ask why again and again and again, and again and again and again, however many times you need to do. So if you start off, you find the environment you're in and you think about what you're passionate about and you reflect back on all that stuff and you're oh, I've got a why. Here, I think this is my why. Here's what I want you to do. When you've got that why, write it down and then ask, so why that? And I think oftentimes what you'll find is there's another why below that, right? Back to the idea of marriage. I'll hear people talk about it and they're we're struggling through this thing. And I'm okay, so why, okay, what do you want or whatever? And they're well, I don't want to be divorced, right? And they're thinking about all the complications of divorce and it feels like failure and all these things. And you know what? It's fine to say, I want to keep working on my marriage because I don't want to be divorced, okay? That's fine. But ask why. Because here's that I don't want to be divorced, and there's nothing wrong with it, but understand it's being driven by the fear of, right? There's some fears in the back of your mind. I don't want to be divorced. And I promise you, fear is never your deepest why. What happens when the fear goes away? The motive goes away. See, so there's something deeper in there. Something people often say to me, after that, they're oh, well, I want to be a good spouse. Well, that's really good. That's good. But I promise you, that's not the deepest level. Being a good spouse, it's good, but it's somewhat of an obligation, right? I ought to be a good spouse. I want to okay. But you know what? An obligation is never going to be your deepest why. There'll always be something that will outweigh an obligation. There's always a way around an obligation. So ask yourself again, why? Why? And as you process it and as you wrestle with it, you'll start working it down. I remember, in a way, I kind of went through this process going into ministry. When I first went into ministry, I just felt man, God called me into ministry. I should go do that. Well, that's a great reason, right? But that couldn't be my deepest why. And you're but if you felt God, yeah, but it's just okay, I'll do what you say, God, right? And then as I started getting into it, I was just well, I want to be a good pastor. Well, that's good too. But that wouldn't sustain me through the ups and downs and the difficulty. And then there came a time where it's just okay, I want to help lead and grow a really healthy church. And that's really good. But over the years, I've kept asking that why question and that why question. And what I have found, what has captured my heart from Christ is a different kind of church, right? Where grace reigns, where the model of how we live, how we choose what we will do will not be a list of rules, but a relationship with Christ, see? And if I feel it in my face right now, my face is getting fuzzy just talking about it, right? And I'm finding this deeper and deeper why. And that is the thing, right? That pulls me through on bad days. It puts gas in my tank. And we need to find that small handful of whys that help us navigate life, whether it's raising kids or navigating our career or figuring out what God is calling us to next, because it will put gas in your tank, friends. Find that why. Then, let me just close with this thought. Let your why be the thing that drives you. Let your why be that gas in your tank. You know, it's interesting, my sister really went through a difficult stretch, that her husband had some really severe health issues. Both of her daughters went through some severe health issues. And then just the worst surprise ever, her husband Kelly came down with cancer, and it was very aggressive, and he passed away really fast. And she just, all of a sudden, she never dreamed that she'd be a widow raising 2 teenage girls. And there she was in that spot. And I remember a moment talking with her not long after Kelly had passed away. And she said to me, she said, you know, I think I need to pick up my cello again and start practicing. I was like, really? Like, and you would think if at any point in someone's life, you could say, you know, don't worry about that, right? It would be at that time in her life. But for her, it was connected to her why. And I remember she said this, she said, I've never been like in a major symphony. I want to be in a symphony. I want to try out for the Arizona Southern Symphony. I'm going to start, and she did, and she picked up that cello, and she's now in the Arizona Southern Symphony because there's something, right, that pulled her forward. Wouldn't work for me, right? But for her, it was, she's bringing something good and beautiful into the world. And that was her why. What is your why, friends? Because that will be gas in your tank.